Hello, everyone. We are so glad that you're joining us for today's webinar titled From Isolation to Connection, How Dialogue Strengthens Student Mental Health. It's hosted by the Constructive Dialogue Institute. My name is Kaylee Maroka. I'm the Director of Campus Culture Transformation at the Constructive Dialogue Institute, and I'm going to be moderating our panel today. The Constructive Dialogue Institute is a nonpartisan nonprofit that partners with colleges and universities to create cultures of inquiry and dialogue. We are here today with scholars and practitioners in the field of mental health and student well-being because we know that student mental health and well-being is a challenge across the landscape of higher education. Today, our esteemed panel is going to explore how dialogue programs can be integrated into campus well-being efforts in ways that advance two goals at once, both increasing student connection as well as strengthening student well-being. Before we jump in, I am going to briefly introduce each of our three panelists. First up, Dr. Gina Burrell-Abrams. Dr. Abrams has been working to develop healthy campus communities as a licensed social worker and public health practitioner for over 25 years. She's an associate professor at the International Institute of Restorative Practices Graduate School and teaches at Boston University and Tulane Schools of Social Work. As a health promotion and higher education leader, Abrams has authored many seminal documents in the field, including the Interassociation Wellbeing Definition and the CAS Cross-Functional Framework for Advancing Health and Wellbeing, along with its complementary self-assessment guide. She co-edited the CAS Standard and Guidelines for Health Promotion Services, the ACHA Standards of Practice for Health Promotions in Higher Education, and the ACHA Hiring Guidelines for Health Promotion in Higher Education, so just a few documents there. Dr. Abrams has presented extensively on standards-based practice and frequently consults for colleges and universities on transformative approaches to creating health-promoting environments. She's the principal investigator of the Restorative Practices in Higher Education Learning Collaborative and was the founding director of the Collaborative Center for Restorative Practices in Higher Education, and we're so excited that she's with us today. Our second panelist is Dr. Samantha Smith, who's a public health practitioner and researcher with over a decade of experience. Her career focuses on the health and well-being experiences of college-age populations. Her research portfolio includes substance use among young adults and the impact of protest participation on college student mental health, including scholarly publications in both areas. Additionally, she's a health education specialist and a restorative practices facilitator. Dr. Smith is currently the Associate Vice Chancellor for Health and Wellbeing at Indiana University Bloomington. Dr. Smith has held progressive leadership roles within higher education, specifically focused on student health and well-being. She's a recognized leader in college health and has served in a number of national efforts to improve the well-being of students. And last, but certainly not least, is Jasmine Jerkowitz, who's the Assistant Director of Inclusive Wellbeing and Hokie Wellness at Virginia Tech. They work with both the Mental Health Initiatives team within Hokie Wellness and with Residential Wellbeing as a content expert for belonging and community wellbeing. Jasmine believes that working with students to develop their mental health skills, to reduce the stigma around asking for help, and to build community and healthy relationships helps to prepare them for a lifetime of wellness. Jasmine's also working towards a PhD in engineering education, where they study emotions in engineering, faculty development, mental health, and mindfulness, and asset-based pedagogy. What a great group we have here today with us to talk about this topic. So Dr. Abrams is going to kick us off by helping us to think about the answer to the question, what does current research say about the connection between concepts like community and dialogue and student mental health and well-being? Following her overview on that topic, we're going to engage the rest of the panel in discussion. We'll also reserve some time for audience question and answer, so please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A box on your screen at any point throughout the webinar. Dr. Abrams, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Kaylee, for including me in this important session. Social connection is a critical and underappreciated contributor to individual and community mental health and well-being. And I'd like to begin with the U.S. Surgeon General, who released a landmark report highlighting an epidemic of loneliness and isolation, and identifying a crisis of connection as a fundamental public health challenge. This crisis is characterized by increasing social isolation, declining sense of belonging, reduced community engagement, weakening social bonds, and growing feelings of loneliness. Social connection is defined as a continuum of the size and diversity of one's social network and roles, and these functions, and the functions that these relationships serve, and the positive or negative qualities in these relationships. Kaylee, next slide, please. And so, in fact, the Surgeon General calls structure, function, and quality the three vital components of social connection. And this emphasizes that an individual's level of social connection is more than just the number of relationships that they have. Working with young people and college students, we know that they may have thousands of connections, yet still feel lonely. And this is unsurprising because the number of close friendships has declined over the last several decades. Time spent alone increased, in person social engagement decreased, and this decline is most pronounced among young people ages 15 to 24. So, for this age group, time spent in person with friends decreased by nearly 70% in the last 20 years, from roughly 150 minutes per day to 40 minutes per day. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this decline. But returning to the definition of social connection, it's important to embrace that social connection exists on a continuum. It's dynamic, it's not static. And just like health is not merely the absence of disease, social connection is more than the absence of social deficits. And so, with that in mind, I'd like to explore the factors that influence social connection. And these factors include individual factors, relationship factors, and then societal and environmental factors. And so, taken together, this sounds a lot like the social ecological model. And so, this means that social connection is not determined solely by individual choice. It's shaped by a complex mix of personal, relational, and environmental factors. So, for the individual factors, we're talking about physical, mental health, functional or sensory impairments, socioeconomic status, life stage, race, gender, personality, and other intrapersonal characteristics. When we're talking about the interpersonal or those relationships, it's the size and composition of one's social network with friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, perhaps, the frequency and type of social interactions and social support, the depth, the trust, belonging, and meaning in those relationships. And then societal and environmental factors can include decline in community and civic group involvement, fewer traditional social institutions, and increased use of digital technology, remote work, the built environment, urban design, and evolving social norms. And some people are at greater risk of social disconnection simply because of circumstances beyond their control. So, again, health issues, age, economic hardship, living in communities with fewer opportunities for connection. And so, addressing loneliness and isolation effectively requires understanding of this full context and working beyond individual only solutions. Unsurprisingly, college students are particularly vulnerable to disconnection and loneliness. Factors including the transition from home to a new environment, academic, financial, and social stressors, digital distractions, and identity factors can amplify students' risk. Kaylee, next slide, please. And the impact of all of this is significant. And I wanted to share that an active a recent Active Minds study found that almost two-thirds of college students report feeling lonely. And we know that college students who report feeling lonely are over 4 times more likely to experience severe psychological distress. And this includes the impact to mental health. Students who feel lonely are significantly more likely to report symptoms of depression, anxiety, and distress. Loneliness in students has been associated with worse sleep quality and higher risk of insomnia, even more strongly than screen time. Loneliness correlates also with increased odds of substance use or misuse, stimulants, opioids, marijuana. Loneliness may also lead to social withdrawal, and some studies have found that loneliness ex- predicts excessive internet use or social media addiction. And all of this leads to a negative impact on academic life and engagement. So, mental health, mental distress, poor sleep, social withdrawal, and decreased motivation can harm academic performance and engagement. So, before I hand the mic back to Kaylee and my co-panelist, I'd like to just briefly introduce a framework that can help us begin addressing the crisis of connection. And I'd like to anchor the framework first in dialogue. And so remember that dialogue creates mutual understanding, reducing misperceptions that drive disconnection, builds empathy and humanization, helping people see each other as more than stereotypes, strengthens social trust, making cooperation possible, even across differences. It interrupts reactive conflict cycles, replacing defensiveness with curiosity. And dialogue fosters shared problem solving, allowing groups to address challenges together rather than fracture further. And so a few years ago, I created a relational model to advance community health, and I have found it helpful to use also as a lens for considering and addressing campus concerns as well. And starting, I want to emphasize that even though these components, one is no more important than the other, but focusing on social connection is so essential. And other components include facilitating community engagement, fostering positive social norms, nurturing collaboration, addressing harm and healing, and increasing equity in systems and policy. And I'd like to briefly discuss each component, highlighting some of the things to consider, and you'll see the elements of dialogue throughout. So, starting with social connection, it can be helpful to focus on building relational skills and the competencies required to develop self-awareness, to learn more about each other, and to be seen more fully by others. This can include listening, empathy, storytelling, the expression of emotion, acting with authenticity and accountability, and the commitment to making things right. And it's also important, as I had mentioned earlier, to consider the impact of the digital environment. Next is community engagement. And instead of doing things with the campus community, instead of doing things to the campus community or for the campus community, it's so important to do things with them in a way that is encouraging high accountability and high support. And we can do this by inviting, respecting, and encouraging all voices, skills, and leadership as strengths. We can focus on listening, the community history, shared power, and co creation, and dialogue facilitates all of this. Proactive circles can also scaffold participation and the courage to speak freely. When we're talking about social norms, these are fostering positive social norms that align with a shared vision for the community's optimal health. It is so important for folks to be on the same page, and especially if we can normalize a relational and pro-social culture where all members can contribute for mutual benefit while still honoring individual identities. Collaboration and co-creation, the importance of nurturing a psychologically safe environment where honesty, candor is expected and individuals can take risks. And circles and dialogue can help to overcome resistance, exchange ideas, and encourage diverse perspectives. Participatory learning and action, decision making can help to address conflict also when it occurs. Harm and healing. It's so imperative to address harm by helping everyone process what has happened, using dialogue methods like restorative practices to structure conversation, listening circles to address impact, and formal restorative justice conferences for more serious situations. And it's so important as well to facilitate healing by preventing future harm. If we are putting folks back into the old environment um, that was facilitating the harm, there cannot be healing. And the last component is systems and policy. And we need to identify the root causes that inhibit good health and structuring processes and policies that are inclusive and just. Using participatory learning and action methods to support movements can also be helpful because they are advocating for systemic change and policies that codify collective and co-creative processes. And so all of this, and again, it was intended to be just brief, to provide a little structure, and my colleagues are going to talk more about this in detail. But all of this at this moment can seem incredibly daunting. And so I usually like to share this quote from Peter Block in his book, Community, the Structure of Belonging. And he says, how do you change the world? Well, one room at a time. Which room? The room you're in. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Kaylee.
Haley, you're
Kaylee, you're muted.
great. Thank you. You'd think you'd know how to do that at that point, right? Thanks, Dr. Abrams. It's really great to hear all of the different ways that dialogue and restorative practices can have an impact on community health, not just connection of college students, but really their health and well-being. And before I open the conversation up to our full panel, we do have one question that came in about your presentation that I was hoping we could ask first, if that's okay. And that is, what are some of the social or environmental factors proven to have a positive impact on social connection? I think you mentioned some of those environmental factors, and some examples would be helpful.
Thank you. So, one of the things that has been so important in my journey, thinking about well-being, was when I was part of the inter-association definition of well-being crafting process, and one of the key learnings from that process, and that is part of the definition, is that there is a distinction between individual well-being and community well-being. They are, of course, not mutually exclusive, so synergistic, but the emphasis on community well-being and these factors, thinking about again the kinds of norms. Are the norms not supporting good health? Is the environment not a facilitating one? Thinking about the policies, thinking about the built environment. There are certainly campuses that are intentionally built for social connection, for physical um, activ physical activity. Thinking about the ways in which we are designing programs to create social connection from the outset when students are arriving on campus. Again, the norms. So what I encourage folks to do is to go to that um, definition, and I'm not sure if we can put it in a chat box someplace, but the community well-being definition has a whole set of factors. It is robust, and that can be very, very helpful.
Great. Thank you so much. I saw we have some other really great questions coming in. I think our other panelists have some expertise in that as well. So we're going to sort of bring everyone into the conversation, and we will get to as many of audience questions as we can as we go. So please continue to drop those in the chat. But Jasmine, Samantha, we really want to get to know you a little better. So Dr. Smith, I just want to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role, your work with well-being and mental health, and in particular, how you see this conversation around dialogue, community health, and well-being in your work and research?
Thank you so much, Kaylee. Also, thank you, Gina, for a wonderful presentation as well. Just a bit of behind the curtain, Gina and I work together. And so all the things she's talked about, I'm actually going to talk about how we put them in practice a bit at IU Bloomington. And so as Kaylee said, my name is Dr. Samantha Smith. Please call me Samantha. And I currently serve as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Health and Wellbeing at Indiana University Bloomington. And so what does that big title mean? So I oversee people. So I'm a people leader, senior leader in that capacity. And I oversee the Student Health Center, which includes counseling and psychological services, our recreational sports team, also our health promotion team, which includes substance use counseling, and our collegiate recovery center. And so I've been here about a year now, almost. That's wow, very fast. I got here in January. It's almost next January. And so in my time here, though, this conversation around dialogue and community health, I have actually had to reformat that, thinking about being a people leader. So when we want to support the health and well-being of our campus community and our students, oftentimes we don't think about how we do that at the root by thinking about staff well-being. So across our higher education landscape, we see lots of folks who are choosing to leave our campuses for a myriad of reasons, and go into private practice or go into corporate America and take their very transformative skills into other places. And so what we have are sometimes are deficits on our campus that create gaps in service, gaps in experiences for our students. And when we have gaps, students fall through them. And then we have a capacity where we are needing to now critically address a crisis or kind of do fire after fire. And so one of my goals when I arrived at IU was to think about how do we help to set the tone for our leaders in their practice and allow that to show up in how they serve our students. And so, as Gina pointed out, when we think about healing from harm, that was kind of the first order of business for me. My team had gone through a tumultuous environment. And so using restorative practices, a healing circle, and then using dialogue to set who we decided we wanted to be moving forward was going to be critical in how we were going to lean on each other in times of turbulent times. And we are in turbulent times, and I don't think they're going to become the opposite of turbulent anytime soon. And so using the relational nature of dialogue has helped us to be able to also translate that into how we are serving students. So part of my tall order of business is also to select a health and well-being framework for the IU Bloomington community. That framework is going to help us to organize our services, resources, experiences to more intentionally support the health and well-being of our campus community. And so by you sending my leaders through the experience of being in dialogue, being in circle, to have those relational conversations with one another, they were then able to replicate that with our students when they were asking our students some very critical questions about how is the university failing you? And how are we supporting you in your health and well-being? This became really critical when we were working with students from underserved populations who there was already institutional mistrust. And so we were having to overcome years of work that had nothing to do with us to help them to trust us in understanding that we would take their needs and that we would do something with it. And so a part of the restorative practices dialogue process is helping folks to understand fair process. So how are we going to use this information? What is the wraparound? What's the conclusion? And when the students began to see that we were closing the loop intentionally, they began to say, hey, more of us can talk to you, more of us can share with you. And so as a campus leader, a lot of times we might think that some of our dialogue practices are kind of situated at the individual level, but in fact, we can use those principles to actually help our leaders to have intentional conversations with students, also with how they are supervising their students and their professional staff members. So, and then as I use this work with students, back in my time at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, I did interventions that were dialogue based, but they also were focused on well-being, and they were particularly among Black women and femme-identified Black women. Black, femme, and women and femmes. Y'all work it out. I don't, and so in that space, we were able to help people not only create connection with one another, but there's a part of this where you get to hear your story from somebody else. And so that in and of itself is healing for some students. There are indigenous resources that get to be shared in circle or in group with folks as they are using dialogue practices that help them to become the agents of their own health and well-being journey. And so I think as we continue to use this practice to help empower staff, we can also help empower students too through connection. Thanks, Kaylee.
Thanks, Dr. Smith. And Jasmine, I'm curious, same question. So how are you seeing this in your role and your work?
Absolutely. I was so lost in everything Samantha was saying. I was just like, I feel like I'm learning things today and forgot that I was up next. But I exist in a relatively unique position here at Virginia Tech. I serve within two departments that are both housed under the health and well-being area and student affairs. And so I spend half of my time working with Hokie Wellness, which is very much looking at that day-to-day approach, right? A very proactive approach to our wellness. And we cover both students, employees. I'm on the student side there. But then I work with residential well-being, which recently underwent a lot of change, like Samantha and Gina were both saying, in like the tumultuous times in which the residence life and housing model was entirely revamped to come from more of that well-being approach. And so we now, instead of resident assistants, we call them student leaders. And I have the benefit of getting to work with a subset that specifically focus on belonging and community well-being. And so much of what both Gina and Samantha have said about not only what skills and frameworks we use, we also talk about that piece of supervision. We talk about the experiences that these student leaders bring, even in that range of being 18 to 22, typically, and we talk so much about their ability to engage in dialogue, because oftentimes when they're undergoing their trainings, they're preparing to meet all of their residents who are living on campus, there is that discomfort, there is that uncertainty for how they engage in those conversations, if they're the right people to engage in those conversations. And that goes into the programming that they offer, but also the conversations that we have with them about enabling that exploration of identity is a huge piece for us, building and developing relationships, but then also what leadership might look like for students in their time at Virginia Tech. And so I could, wax poetic about the other two areas, of course, which are well-being and experience VT. And so they, very similarly to that socio-ecological model of looking at the individual, looking at the community in the residence halls, but then looking at the community at the university. So much of my work and how I interact with students is reminding them that they're students, but also that they're people. And that so many of the things that they learn in their time, regardless of the university they're at, is going to set them up ideally for a life centered around wellness and their well-being. And so a lot of the work that we do, a lot of the programs and offerings we've brought into Virginia Tech, just to name a couple, the Connection Project that originally started at the University of Virginia, which is all about dialogue around connection. The Community Resiliency Model, which is from the Trauma Resource Institute, like talking about community and how it responds to some of that tumultuous times, and often, perhaps being trauma informed in the ways that we're responding to things. There's so many different ways that conversations are the start of our work around well-being and mental health.
Thank you, Jasmine. These are great questions coming in the chat. Keep them coming. Like I said, we'll discuss as many of them as we can. For panelists, if you see a question directed at you and you want to type it back, feel free, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we'll try to call out as many as we can. But I want to talk just for a minute about, and anyone can answer this question, but we're in a, I think, very unique moment in time and in history. We're obviously currently facing, as Gina started to outline, what many call a mental health crisis, while also facing, as folks know, a very major shift in higher education across the board, from a decline in public trust to an increase in polarization on campuses and many other things. What do you think is critical about this work in order for us to meet the current moment? And maybe what challenges are there in there as well? And like I said, anyone can jump in on this one.
Samantha, we unmuted at the same time. Who's going first?
Okay, you go first.
Sure. When I was thinking about what's critical to this moment, I was thinking a lot about, the shout out to CDI and the work that they've done, their Perspectives program. And a huge part of a lot of our work is meeting people where they are. I think that to acknowledge, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic shifts in, socio-emotional skills that students are coming with into college. They have a lot of life experiences that are helping or hindering some of those developments. That so often meeting students where they are and meeting faculty where they are, as opposed to assuming what they should know or do know, I think has been incredibly helpful. I have to quote my students here that I get to work with in talking about connections. They talk about nonchalantness so much, of this idea that, oh, if I'm nonchalant, I'm cool. I'm not so worried about anything. Has been a mask, has been a barrier for a lot of folks about connection, and a cause that they have pioneered is being more chalant. And I think that that is something for anyone trying to engage in these conversations, is to actually be explicit in the care that you hold and the conversation that you want to have. And one way that I've done that is acknowledging my part, acknowledging my responsibility in building trust, especially when we think about various power dynamics that exist, especially in university settings, as a professional staff member supporting student leaders who get their housing and some of their food stipends from the work that they're doing as student leaders. Like, what does it look like to support them and to hold them accountable for the role that they're in, is showing who I am as a person and talking about that. And so I think especially about the work that I've been lucky to do with the Black Cultural Center here on campus, is how do I show up? How do I go and support those spaces and know when to listen, so that when they have a need or when they have a desire to engage in dialogue, they also know, hey, we can talk to this person. I've done that with lots of different communities around campus, and it's done nothing but improve the work that we're doing around this mistrust, and to help kind of create it back at that ground level again.
Thank you, Jazz. men. So, I would also just think that what is critical right now is relationships. We are in a time where relationships matter a whole lot. Being able to rely on community members, being able to rely on each other, checking in with one another, being checked on. Those things are going to be the components of life that actually help to get us through some of our toughest times. And so when I think about my role now and why it felt really important for my staff team to be trained in restorative practices, to use dialogue, especially around things like employee relations issues and so human resource issues. I'm grateful that our human resources department is understanding of my restorative approach around employee relations issues. And that's because in these moments, sometimes we are meeting someone's behavior and not them. Something else is happening, something external in the environment, something outside of their control. And we're seeing a behavior that is absent of who they actually are. And so when we think about keeping it about the person, never keeping it about the behavior and never the person, we can address that behavior. We've had commitments about what shows up in our team, what is a part of our community. At IU, our community is my portfolio. All three of those departments, we meet together, the leaders meet together, the staff work together because they got one singular leader, and that's me. And so I'm not doing this three separate thing. We're all working together to help support the health and well-being of our students. And so when we are trying to address an issue with one of our staff members, it's really important for us to use that restorative approach. But you have to have relationship there, some type of relationship, some type of humanity has to be there. We've had to acknowledge your humanness. We've had to acknowledge or build teamwork, build trust at some capacity to really help people know that you belong in this community. Maybe that behavior that we're seeing is not, but you belong here. And so that helps with retention. Retention is going to make sure we have services and experiences and we close those gaps so that when our students are needing us, we don't have places where they're falling through because we didn't do the work on the side as administrators and staff members to shore up what we could. We can't always hire more people. I'd love to give people more money, but the best I can do is a better workplace environment where you want to be. And the challenges with that is that dialogue work, relationship building takes time. It is not an overnight process. It is incremental vulnerability. And that even starts with me. So I have to, show my own humanity with my staff team. I also spend time with people, not just my direct reports, the coordinators, the folks who are keeping our buildings up and running. It's nothing to have a conversation with them to acknowledge that they are a part, that they are playing an integral part in supporting the well-being of students. And so that's all our mission within my area. And so the challenges, it takes time. It's going to take energy. I don't know if there are other leaders on this, the call here, the webinar here, but the intention is going to pay off. But it will take time, and it's going to take energy too. When we think about these dialogue practices, it's not just the talking, it's the listening. This is an embodied practice. We are using our full selves to acknowledge and honor the people who are in front of us. And so I tell people, if you leave a circle or a dialogue practice and you're not feeling totally exhausted, something's gone wrong. So we haven't done some listening, we haven't done some paying attention, something like that. So I would say those relationships matter, but the time that it takes, especially as things are changing so rapidly, is going to be a challenge for us.
And if I can just jump in really, really quickly because I'm hearing things from Jasmine and Samantha, and then I was reading the comment from Joel in the chat here, which is about when there is a lack of time for authentic, sustained dialogue and right, and how uh, to keep students engaged over time. And so one of the things that was common between what Jasmine and Samantha have said is that it has to start with me. That's one, right? So how am I choosing to show up in all of my engagements? So that's one. And then coupled with that, right, is that it's yes, dialogue and the core principles of dialogue and engagement and co-creation and listening and empathy can of course happen during those planned times, but during the day-to-day just normal actions that you're going to do anyway. I have to engage with the person down the hall when I walk past them on the way to a meeting, or at home I have to engage with my daughter who's 16 and is the love of my life and the thorn in my side. And so, how am I going to choose to show up every day in those, in those routine times? Um, that's the important part to me about modeling. And so then, if you are thinking about, then widening the circle to invite others to embrace these core principles of just again daily every day showing up, right, with these fundamentals. And then we think about engaging folks in a cross-sector way, right? So now you've widened the circle and you've got more folks who are just by their own actions, how they're showing up, they're starting to shift the norms that are around them. So again, just a few more things to consider.
Thanks, Dr. Abrams. One of the things I'm seeing we're not going to be able to get to every specific question, I think, but one of the themes I'm seeing throughout the chat that maybe we can talk about together is I'm seeing some requests for examples of programs maybe that you've done that have increased psychological safety or that have helped to break down the issue where students are reluctant to engage, whether that's generally in a classroom or specifically with people who have different ideologies or opinions than them. So I'm wondering, I know all of you do, but I'm wondering if folks would be willing to share an example or two of a program or an initiative or story that can help people to really wrap their mind around this work.
So I'll give a little more, I'll give a twofold example, one a little deeper. So the initiative, the intervention I was talking about earlier is called Sister Care. And I think my colleague, Dr. Jasmine Lee, might be on this webinar, who I helped her to add the mental health component to the work that she was already doing. So Sister Care was a dialogue-based intervention already. And so so we had a series, and so we had a curriculum that we did that was developed, and in that curriculum there were different topics that were identity based. But then my team, we came in and did components specific around how mental health and identity are then pulling together, sometimes in concert, and then sometimes going in opposite directions of one another. And so it was kind of a cohort model, but it really wasn't. So there wasn't like you didn't have to just stay. You could come in and out, and if you showed up that week, you wouldn't be behind. If you showed up every week, you wouldn't be ahead. And so that was helping students to not feel kind of that time pinch. Like if I don't go to everything, I can't do the entire series. You can come in and out as you'd like to. And so we had it in an environment that was familiar to students, to Black women and femmes on the campus. So one of the things that I want to point out here is that restorative practices work or a dialogue work, it is intentional down to the details. So how we meet with students is important. So it's not that they come to us, we go somewhere where they already feel familiar, so that we're now reducing some of the barriers to actually sharing or communicating with us or one another. So being in a familiar place, always a snack or two is going to be helpful. But as we went through the curriculum, so we had some like organized conversation, but then we allowed students to share their own perspectives. And that's where that kind of healing that I was talking about was happening. And so as people talked about their own upbringing with people they might know or not, and then someone else say like, oh yeah, I grew up that way too. And that's how it shows up in the way that I don't seek help now, or I do seek help, or how I overcame this, or I'm still struggling to overcome something. And so in that space, students are able to work together to say, here's, something I used. Oh, I had that same feeling. Here's how I was able to overcome that. Even a student saying, yeah, I actually went to counseling services and this was my experience. experience. And so in that way, they're hearing from one another about how to overcome some of the challenges that that they're experiencing. They're also creating connection with one another as well in the process. We were there as professional staff members. One, we always want to make sure that the environment stays safe. If we hear anything that sounds like suicidal ideation, self-harm, other things like that, we want to make sure that we are intervening as appropriate. But we sat in circle and took ourselves back to even those moments where we were 18 to 22 to even say, hey, we too, you might look at us as people to aspire to, but we too have had those same thoughts and feelings that you've had. And so that's the relational part that can help students in an intervention process.
Yeah, I want to echo a couple of the things that Samantha said, but then also provide a couple specific examples that we've used here at Virginia Tech. One, the piece of going where students already are, I think is incredibly powerful. I'll mention our cultural and community centers. Again, some of our most successful programs have been going into those spaces where it's something that might serve that population, but other students are also welcome to join as well. I think a great example of this, one with the Pride Center did a Just Journaling series, right? Of course, journaling can be incredibly powerful for reflection, not only as an individual, but within a community, within a community. And we saw great engagement by not trying to dress it up as anything other than what it was. It was like, come get a journal, come have a lunch, and like be with people and seeing people engage, right? Trade markers, complement each other's work, whether it be artwork or writing or, you know, a collage, things like that, that were the conversations were more organic, something like that. But then we also have something like we did a skill building for ADHD and more with the Black Cultural Center for ADHD Awareness Month and talked about how difficult it can be, whether you have a diagnosis of ADHD or anything else, or just living life and having difficulties with tasks, that we were able to talk about different skills and how they might be applied and give students an opportunity not only to practice the skills, but to talk about, oh, I don't understand this, or actually, this makes a lot of sense. And I can see, I can help the person next to me work on their thing. And so giving students opportunities to explore a skill or explore a practice and just talk to them while they're doing it. I think there's so much power in the structure of a circle, like Samantha was talking about, but then also just in some of these opportunities to just be people. The other thing I wanted to specifically mention was the Connection Project again, that we have here at Virginia Tech. It is a one course or one credit course that students can take where there's no homework, there's no exams. They can get an A by showing up and talking to people. And that is a big enough incentive for them, right? Like whether it be food, right, to meet a basic need, or a course credit that helps, you know, keep their full-time status, is that we've seen students really be interested in this piece of, oh, I'm taking a class and I'm learning something, but I'm doing it just through talking to people. And that's been incredibly powerful. We've been increasing that and following very much in the University of Virginia's footsteps. And I believe Georgetown is still pioneering that process as well. The last thing I'll mention, so I'm not talking for too long, within the residential well-being space, we've started something that we call box programs. And so, at least from my angle in belonging and community well-being, I say to my student leaders, program what you want, add what students need, because I will not be the person to tell a student leader that they can't play Mario Kart or have a karaoke night with their residents. And that piece of, but what are they getting out of it besides showing up and singing a song of their choice? And so we look at these pieces of, we talk about identity development, relationship development, and leadership development. Is what is something that we can help provide that adds a little bit of that structure, a little bit of that learning, but can still align with what the student leaders care about and want to do. And we've done that in all of these different areas. And so it might look like filling out an identity wheel and having a conversation about who you are. It might be, oh gosh, I'm forgetting all of the work that I've done recently. It might be identity mocktails. So creating a drink based on who you are or identities you might have and getting to like walk away with it. Letter to future selves, right? A piece of writing a letter to yourself, but also doing it with other people. And whether it's, decorating a lovely piece of stationery or even these like book boxes where they get to store it before they open it, is that we get to create a lot of these conversations through small actions with, like Gina was saying, with the students.
Thank you. Well, we're getting close on time, but I do want to ask one more question. I'm going to ask all of our panelists to answer this briefly if you're willing. But I'm curious, what's the larger shift that you hope to see across higher education if campuses embrace dialogue as a well-being strategy? And then if you're feeling inspired, feel free to share one piece of advice with this audience that you think you would hope that they would take with them as they leave this space. Why don't we go in reverse? So Jasmine, can I encourage you to go first?
Absolutely. I'm so glad I wrote down things for this. I'm going to start with the advice. I see this a lot. We have the privilege of offering suicide prevention workshops and education, and so often it feels like there's so much that we aren't doing. But at the end of the day, like Gina was saying before, it only takes one person to start a conversation, and it's quite empowering. It's quite novel. It's quite wonderful to be the person willing to start the conversation, regardless of how the conversation goes or if the person reciprocates. Like knowing that you're showing up can be phenomenal just for your own well-being. And so I think that I wrote that down in the form of seeking opportunities to learn. So if, for example, Hokie Wellness here has an employee side, and so there's programs just for employees to come and be in that space, but also opportunities to learn. Knowing your resources, whether it's in your community, on a university campus, oftentimes when we end up talking to someone, we get stuck because we don't know what's next or what options we can provide to that person. And so knowing what your resources look like, and you might not have firsthand experience of what those offices or resources provide, but knowing that they're there is so helpful to say, hey, it sounds like what you're dealing with is incredibly tough. I'm wondering if exploring this resource might be helpful, is an incredible part of dialogue. And then just that piece of thinking about yourself, thinking about when you're having conversations with people, what is it that you're willing to share to show them that you're navigating a journey in individual and community wellness? And it's incredibly powerful to say, hey, I'm not perfect in this. Like, there's a lot for me to learn too, but we can do it together. What I do hope to see, though, and it was a great piece of Gina talking about being on the same page, is I do hope to see that reduction in loneliness. Seeing people actually feel like they belong in a space is, for lack of a better term, like magical. Like it's an aha moment to see a student find their corner of campus or find their group of people to be close to. And so getting to be a part of that, I think, will help lead to that shift of everyone coming together.
Dr. Smith, you want to go next?
Sure. I think the shift that I would like to see is places where people want to be. Places where people want to be when it's tough, places where people want to be when it's going well, especially as I think from the staff and faculty perspective, how much dialogue work and restorative practices work can really help to create from a proactive standpoint. We didn't talk about it as much here, but we can use a lot of this to build the team, not just respond to a harm or respond to something that's happened. And so I really hope that we are creating places where people want to be there and where students want to reach out, because it started with us, and it's not just about making sure the gaps are filled and we have the services, but it's also about the quality of the experience students are going to get when they show up, because the environment that we've created for the people administering the support and the resources has fed into them in a positive way. So I really hope we get back there, or find our way there. And then I would say pieces of advice. I know we've talked, about circles, and we've talked about dialogue practices and things like that. I want to make it very simple for some folks, and just say that it just starts by acknowledging someone's humanity. There's a person in front of you. Okay. They are not just a missed deadline, a financial aid issue, food insecurity. That is a human being. And so if you don't do anything else, acknowledge the human in front of you. And ask the deeper questions. Student is having a big emotion and you might say, "Are you okay?" You see they're not okay. Tell me what's going on, and just taking that first step and acknowledging what's happening in front of them. People feeling seen and heard is going to be integral in them being able to feel safe to reach out when the time comes. I would also remind people that knowing those resources, as Jasmine said, is really important because there are health and well-being staff on your campuses who just need you to make the referral. Sometimes people feel like, well, if I ask a deeper question, now I gotta walk the student over and I gotta follow them through this and I gotta become a case manager all of a sudden. And I don't want you to do any of that. I want to speak on behalf of every health and well-being senior leader in the nation. Please don't do that. We have trained staff and folks on our campuses who can do that. We need you to acknowledge that human in front of you, know the referral resource, make that referral, and let those teams take over and continue to help that student. And the last thing I'll say is that, while well-being is in a portfolio, it is in people's titles and things like that, you just being a human takes care of a lot more than you think it does. Sometimes just saying like, this seems pretty scary, doesn't it? And then a student letting you know exactly how scary it feels. You are acknowledging them, even within your own disciplined area. That is absolutely enough sometimes to just get a little bit of pressure off of how they're feeling internally. And it also might create the environment for them to come back in person. A lot of times we're dealing with students who don't want to come in person. They like doing things digitally. We get it. But those interactions that they have in person create a little bit of safety that if I come back, they'll be nice to me here. So really how we make use of that, those tools and perspectives can be helpful. Thanks, Kaylee.
Absolutely. And Dr. Abrams, you want to, in our last minute or so, take us home?
Oh my goodness. Well, I wrote down the first things that came to mind. Humanization, right? So Samantha, you are absolutely on point. Being authentic, right? I truly hope that we can continue to work on creating campuses where students, faculty, staff, the people who are working, living, learning on our campuses can show up as their true selves, and that be okay, right? I again think about my daughter who is 16 and who's going to be in college in 2 years, and we need to continue to grapple with this about how we can honor Gen Z, Alpha preferences, um, and not try and put Gen X type old ways of doing things onto to them, and try and move the needle in ways that are new and creative, but again, that honor who they are as just as different generations entirely with different societal impacts. We can't put the old ways of doing things on them. And my advice is more of an invitation to be up to the challenge of unlearning some of the, right, the ways that as a higher education professional, I may have gotten used to um, acting, surviving in the workplace, in my work with students, showing up with emotion, caring about students and colleagues as whole people. Bringing emotion into the space doesn't mean that I'm not boundaried, right? I mean, I can still have a filter and still care about folks as whole people.
Thank you so much. As we wrap up, I just really want to thank everyone who's joined us today, but obviously especially take a minute to celebrate and thank our brilliant panelists. So please use those emojis to say thank you, celebrate how fantastic they are here. And I apologize that there's never enough time to get to questions, but I do hope that we can continue to stay connected on LinkedIn, on other platforms, and we encourage you to stay connected to the Constructive Dialogue Institute, We'll be sending out a copy of a recording of this webinar in the next 48 hours. So that will give you some contact information for us, as well as this recording if you would like to share it with others. And we appreciate your time, and we thank you so much again for being here. Have a great rest of your day.